Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me on this podcast for the Light Review on our Insight series. So, in this podcast today, we are having a look at the ever-changing landscape of retail. And joining me for this podcast was Neil Knowles, who found time in his busy schedule to fit us in. So, thanks to you, Neil. As you can see, we have to be adaptable in this day and age because as light designers, we have to reflect the market that we are working in. And retail has changed so much in the last few years that it's barely recognizable. Neil's got great perspectives. So if you're just trying to learn the ropes or maybe you want to get some hints and tips, this is the podcast for you. So you get to the end, hit the like button and share. Great to have you along for the ride. Welcome to you, Neil. Thanks very much for taking the time out to talk to us today.
No problems.
So, with online shopping now making up so much of the retail market, I'm actually really interested in the type of projects that you've been involved in and how you approach this arena of lighting design, given that, there's been a pretty seismic change, hasn't there, in the last few years in respect to people's shopping habits and such like.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would deny that the retail sector has undergone a bit of a transformation in the last decade or 2 decades. I think the coronavirus has accelerated this trend, but it hasn't caused it and it hasn't finished it. So, and what we're basically seeing is a shift away from physical stores into online shopping. And what we've tended to do in the last 5 or so years, and it's continuing now, is working on large shopping centres and doing pretty much other things with them. So, for example, large areas of shopping centres being converted into non-retail destinations.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I'm glad that's happening because otherwise, how are you going to fill these chasms of spaces? I didn't realise that was happening. Aside from the pound shops and stuff like that. So, where is that taking you? And who are your clients? Is it the shopping centres themselves?
Yeah, so we've done projects for people like Capital and Regional who have about 20 shopping centres. There's a German company we've done about 5 or 6 for, but we've done quite a few out in Saudi Arabia as well. And the recent good example would be Castle Mall in Norwich, which has it's kind of an L shape, and it was about a third empty, or not empty entirely, as you say. It was being filled with low value pound shops, and the retail management of the centre was being very good at filling it with other things. So they'd have like one of the empty units had loads of table tennis tables in, and they'd get loads of old people coming and play table tennis, and then hopefully they'd stay and go to the cafe upstairs and so on. But what they thought was if they just managed to rearrange some of the units, there'd be this whole third section. It's like an L shape, so the bottom short bit of the L, they thought, well, we can make this all empty and then we can make it into something else. And they applied planning permission for a lot of A3 units, a lot of restaurant bar stuff, if you don't have planning conditions. And it's now branded as the leisure quarter. And there's a lot of bars and restaurants in it. There's a cinema, there's like one of those competitive socializing places where you go along and drink lots of cocktails whilst playing table tennis or golf or axe throwing. Axe throwing's fun, by the way, if you've never done axe throwing.
That you mix that with cocktails, do you? Or probably.
Yeah, axe throwing and cocktails doesn't, not a brilliant combination, to be honest. But yeah, so they have basically converted a large chunk of their retail centre into that. Now, the lighting for that space obviously needs to be completely different to the lighting for a standard retail offering, because you want it to be more lively, more upbeat. You probably want it to be warmer colour temperatures. You probably want it to be more focused towards evening use, so less uniform, lower light levels, more spotty, more neon signs, colour changing bits, for example. Whereas the standard shopping centre tends to be quite white and uniform.
It's more theatrical, isn't it? It feels like what you're telling me is it's more theatrical, more of a. It won't be more of a Butlins, but a Butlins. I suppose what would be the equivalent of Butlins? It's not even a leisure centre, isn't it? I'm not even sure how you would, what you'd call it.
No, it doesn't have a name really. No, it doesn't. There's a few of these sort of places around. There's one like, if you look, let me think, Flatiron or something, where it's just a cluster of bars and restaurants together and there's no retail at all. Or the Printworks in Manchester was one of the first ones, I think. I mean, that must be 20 years old now.
Yeah, I mean, East London is quite good for that sort of stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
Finding an old building, and I quite like around. I do like around Shoreditch and Clerkenwell. They have those crazy golf stuff, and where you might have seen shops before. But that's interesting because that probably makes your work more interesting, but maybe a little bit more difficult to work through. I mean, I can imagine clients that change, or is it just the owner of the shopping centres themselves? Are they your end client, and do they give you the brief and stuff?
There's usually a management team in place, so the owners will be some sort of pension fund or some sort of large people who you will probably never meet, but they usually have a management team involved who run the place and maybe a portfolio of these places on a regular basis. So they would normally be the ones we talk to on a day-to-day basis, but in the end, all the kind of overall plans would get referred up to the pension fund or whoever is actually owns it, who know nothing about lighting or interiors or probably retail or design or anything. So there's a lot of kind of work from us about what the lighting's going to look like. There's a lot of work from the management team about what the overall anticipated forecast revenue uplift is and other such things that I don't really get involved in. And then it comes back down and they say, yes, we like it, we're going to head with it. And we spend however many £1 million on refurbishing the kind of central units in an attempt to increase the occupancy, square meter rate, floor rate, whatever.
That's a massive shift, isn't it? Because I remember when I was doing retail lighting, it was always nice to deal with the like-minded people for something. They spoke the same language, didn't they? If you were dealing with an interior designer, and they would search for not the buzzwords, but you knew you were on the same page when you're talking about creating different areas of contrast and such like. So it sounds like you've got a pretty free rein when it comes to the design input that you have, because you're creating something that's brand new for something.
You are, in a sense, yes. And it's not, I think the thing with when you're working with an interior designer, it tends to be still the case for individual shops, but with a lot of the stuff we do is now malls or shopping centres. So it doesn't tend to be. And they quite often, the one we worked on in Norwich didn't actually have an interior designer on the project. We worked with the architect who did a lot of the kind of overall major refurbishments and knocking down of walls, etc., and us, basically. So there wasn't actually an interior designer. Which would be unheard of in retail, obviously. In any kind of retail fit out, you wouldn't have an architect probably, and you do it the other way around.
Actually, that leads me on to my next question, which is, there's LG17 from the SLL, which was is a guide to retail spaces, but I guess that has actually no bearing on anything that you do. And also, given that, retail had a quite comparatively short lifetime compared to some other installations. How do you design sustainable solutions if it's so fluid?
It's still, let me think. So sustainability within shopping centres is still the same kind of criteria as within individual retail units. You're still after a low energy solution. You're after a lot of daylight harvesting if you can do it. You're after controls and dimming and so on. I think shopping centres tend to be longer lifespan because shops tend to get refurbished on fairly regular, quick turnarounds, but shopping centres will be 20, 30 years. We're regularly surprised at what we find when we go into an existing shopping centre and look at it. One of the things is we go and do a survey of what's there at the moment, and we're still finding tungsten lamps in use and that sort of thing. When we're like, I haven't seen one of these. Where'd you get them from? I haven't seen one of these for 10 years. Less and less, but we're still also finding shopping centres where the control system is a large bank of switches on the wall and someone has to turn them off at night. So the idea that we could drop their energy use by 80% if we switch to LED and put a decent control system, or 90% even, they are astonished and happy that we do this. So, and it does that. It almost pays for itself with the usage and the occupancy rates and the way that they are open 24/7, a lot of them. or at least 18 hours a day for 6 days a week, the savings in energy use really quickly add up and will quite happily pay for the installation in the first place.
That's crazy. I didn't think that conversation existed anymore. That return on investment conversation. I'd be like, no, that was at least 10 years ago when they said LEDs lasted 200,000 years and everything was going to be fine. They'd never die, never die.
They said they used to say, they said 200,000 hours, and then they dropped it to 100,000. I think most people are quoting 50, aren't they now? And they have been for a while. But I'm surprised we still find tungsten halogen lamp. I can only assume they've been dimmed quite heavily for the last decade and aren't really running very much. So, but we still find them occasionally. I get all nostalgic when I find them. I'm like, oh, these tungsten.
Tungsten. I remember the days.
I found a CDM lamp the other day as well.
They were a pain, weren't they?
Yes.
They were a little bit of a pain.
Which else? I was in a large hotel in central London, and they were refurbishing their bar, and it had xenon in the coffers.
I like xenon.
I love xenon. Yeah, it's got a really nice warmth to it, and I've got some in the office. I dig it out and show it to juniors occasionally, and they'll go, "Wow, it's really nice." And then I tell them it's 200 watts per linear meter, and replace it with LED at 9, and they're like, "Okay." And then I explain about having to do air conditioning to remove that 200 watts as well as generating it in the first place, and actually you're probably talking about 500 watts of total energy use, or 9 from the LED, and they're like, "We're not using that." Again, no, but it's nice, isn't it?
So you get that warmth that you just can't replicate. I don't know, that thing with the LED saying they can replicate halogen and tungsten, that conversation always happens, but I don't know, it's just maybe I've got a false premise, but I never think it's the same. I love that warmth from that used to get rolled out. Anyway, I'm going off on a sidetrack. Actually, in terms of product, how often do you use these to create visual eye candy? I mean, I guess the types of environments that you said you're working in now, it must be quite interesting to introduce some products that are a bit off the wall. And how much is it more about creating the experience now that a tech-savvy consumer is going to Amazon and such like? I mean, the Westfields of this world, they still exist, right?
They do, but they don't tend to have like beautiful decorative lighting in them. They tend to have theatrical lighting. And what I mean by theatrical is lighting that produces an effect for which you can't actually see the light source. They don't tend to have big chandeliers in the way that a hotel ballroom would have a big chandeliers. You're not after a grand statement. And I think part of the reason you're not after that is because you don't want to detract from what the shops are actually selling. So you want to create a backdrop that is cool and interesting and sets a scene, but doesn't actually detract from what's the other side of the shop window. So we don't tend to use chandeliers, decorative wall lights. I mean, there's very few walls in a lot of modern retail shopping centres because they're all glass nowadays, huge, massive glass shop fronts all the way across and very thin columns between them. And you don't really want to put big chandeliers in because their ceiling height is not normally enormously generous. So yeah, we would say that most of the lighting tends to be hidden and creates an effect rather than looks nice.
Like an architectural type of product.
Yeah, but not even kind of visible. If we're using, if we want to get lots of spotlights, for example, we try not to have a visible track surface mounted on the ceiling because that would be there and be intrusive. So we try and hide it somewhere, maybe in a slot, or we put a little detail, or we'd the oldest trick in the book is a black painted slot with a black track in it, isn't it? So you can't really see where it comes from. That's something we were doing 20 years ago, but still works. What else? But yes, the idea would be that you don't see the fittings, you just see the effect of it, and you don't realize where the effect is coming from or how it's done, ideally, like magic.
I think that's a great way to finish, actually. So thanks to you all for tuning in. Be sure to share and whack that subscribe button, and just to keep up with new content. We are here for you. And thank you so much, Neil, for your time today.
No problem, anytime. Okay. Ta-ra.